SaskFSA is a progressive group of agriculture landowners who value Saskatchewan's land and water resources. We advocate for responsible management of those resources and lead discussions around driving practical policy change. We are the farmer's voice when it comes to water management. This is a statement that more than one of our board directors has clearly identified over the last few years, and it's really sticking out more and more as we proceed along this policy journey. But ultimately, water management policy will have the biggest impact on my farm. And so as farmers, we need to know the how this policy will work on my farm. And again, as I mentioned, that SaskFSA is actually the only association in Saskatchewan that is focused on water management. It's our sole purpose of why we exist. And I think that's how we can be really effective in what we do, is we don't have any other policy areas that we actually deal with besides water. Now we're going to dig into why we manage water and why we manage policy, why it's so important. So we do know that weather across this province is variable. We do know that there are regional differences. There's differences across a field, let alone across a farm, and let alone across the province. We know policy will make or break a farm in Saskatchewan. So I know this is so much better to do in person because I can see your faces, but I always typically say at this point, by show of hands, who's familiar with 4R nutrient stewardship, and I'm assuming all of you are aware for our nutrient stewardship. But if we could apply that same concept to water management, we could be laughing. And so ultimately, when it comes down to a farmer's ability to mitigate weather on their farm, there's two ways they can do it. They can do it with water management, so whether that's irrigation or drainage, or they can actually have a crop insurance program. And of course, we know that crop insurance is a reactive program, so that happens after the weather event. Ultimately, though, water drives agriculture, and if you want to sustain crop production, you can't sustain it without drainage. So when it comes to SaskFSA, we have 4 kind of strategic pillars that we work within. Our purpose is to create smart policy solutions to submit to water security and the government. Our second pillar is to build networks across industry, research, government, landowners, etc. Third pillar is awareness and information sharing. And the fourth one is field science. So looking at quantifying some data, collecting some data, technology, pilot projects, etc. So I'm going to dig into the agriculture zone, the ag zone concept that we have developed to support some of our policy solutions. And the ag zone actually originated from the fact that more and more people want a say in how farmers manage their land. So there's a lot of public and social influence on how land is managed. And so in our minds, it's how do you kind of protect the zone that is actually well suited for food production? So a few interesting facts. Saskatchewan hosts about 44% of Canadian farmland. Our job here is to produce food. Of our 161 million acres of total land area in this province, 24% of those acres are annual crop production, 10% are native pasture perennial forage, balanced by about 20% of freshwater acres, conservation areas, parks, nature reserves. And that actually does not include the private NGO acres, nor does that include the habitat lands that farmers actually host within their land base. WSA has a statistic that 86% of Saskatchewan wetlands remain intact. And of course, we know that controlled drainage reduces risk and variability, and drainage is original soil health practice. So looking at the ag zones, in our minds, they're determined by the soil zone. They're determined by your basically moisture climatic conditions across the province. And then we have another factor that we kind of overlay in here with the WSA watershed vulnerability map. And that kind of overlays right over top of the productive soil zones. So you can see this is something we often say is that the most vulnerable areas require responsible management the most. So just that's how we're kind of trying to determine the ag zone. And then we also want to talk about different ways that we can classify water within the agriculture zone. So often some of you may have heard a stat, oh, we lose 70% of Saskatchewan wetlands every day. Well, that is actually not the case. When we look at temporary water, this field is a very good visualization of it. So you can see this crop is already coming up, that there's been an in-season rain event, that there's some water, temporary water sitting on that landscape. So when we look at temporary water, we're talking about water that sits on the landscape anywhere from 1 day to about 3 weeks. And this is what the water that most farmers are managing. There's also seasonal water. So this would be you can call it a class 3 in the Stewart-Cantram system of wetland classification. But essentially, a class 3 or seasonal water would last for anywhere from 1 to 2 months. So that water would be drying up at the end of June, beginning of July, and off the landscape. And then we look at semi and permanent water, so often classified as the big sloughs or the lakes that you would see across the province. Please do interact at any time. I can't see your faces. So Miles, I'm going to rely on you to kind of moderate if someone does have their hand up. So these are some really clear examples of temporary water on the landscape, and we can clearly see these areas are not wetlands, and these wet lands are, or land that is wet, it basically is not good for anybody. This isn't good for the farmer, and this obviously is not good for the environment either. Then we come into our seasonal water that's on the landscape, or class 3s. And these pictures, again, are very good visual examples of how this seasonal water actually has been proven to affect acres up to 2 to 3 times its size. And you can clearly see that by the salinity issues that are happening around these class 3 wetlands in both these photos. And then this is what we would consider permanent water on the landscape. And often this is the water that is left, that is retained within a field because simply it doesn't make economic sense to drain it. And I know firsthand that a lot of producers actually don't mind having this kind of habitat within their field landscape. So this brings about when we're looking at the ag zone and we're looking at different water classifications and the effects of that water on the landscape, that brings about this field efficiency concept. So you can also see with this visual that this cedar is wiggling around all of these potholes, and there has to be, what we are really trying to dig into is the agronomic and the environmental benefits of improving a field efficiency. Here's another example of a field. This is actually belongs to Miles, this field, and he did install some network tile drainage to lower that water table and try and reduce some of the salinity within this field. So I'm going to flip through a couple of yearly progression photos, and this right here is year 1. So you can clearly see here where he actually installed this tile, which is a really neat illustration of the effects of that tile drawing that water table down. This, skipping ahead to year 5, you can see that this land, this soil has basically recovered. It is growing a canola crop. You can still see this tile line through the field here. A little bit of kochia has managed to establish in this area. Canola is not as tolerant to salinity as some of the cereal crops, but again, a really great example of some reclamation. And it kind of ties in the concept of marginal acres, and how we represent marginal acres is essentially that they are acres that are still suitable for crop production. They just need to be, the soil needs to be remediated and remove that salinity. Versus, for example, some land that actually is not suitable for an annual crop production period. So this, we often say the view from the cab. So this is a view from the cab. It's spraying time, and the sprayer operator sends a text and says, what do I do with this? 120-foot boom, no way that I can spray around that crop without hitting the water. And this again is dialing into that field efficiency piece. How can we quantify the field or the benefits of improving field efficiency? So this is not, these potholes aren't present, or this temporary water is not present. So that's the view from the cab. This here is the application map view. And again, precision agriculture can only take us so far in some of these scenarios. And it comes down to a case of many different agronomic and environmental factors. So that brings us to this field efficiency piece. As Sask FSA, we always say that resources are best when they're managed. Doesn't matter what it is, your resources are best when they're managed, and it's no different when it comes to water. So here we're looking at if we can actually improve field efficiency by managing this temporary and seasonal water. This is the list of agronomic and environmental benefits that we could see. And so now it comes down to quantifying some of these benefits. The reduction in salinity, improvement in soil health, reduction of overlap, reduction of crop inputs, reduce your crop loss, improve overall plant health, improve nutrient use efficiency, improve the water use and retention via growing crop instead of a barren pothole. Improve your equipment and labor efficiency, reduce that carbon footprint, reduce denitrification, reduce compaction, restore those marginal acres, and improve weed control even, and reduce some of that weed resistance that we're seeing pop up. So an overall increase in productive acres by managing this temporary and seasonal water. So what Sask FSA, okay, so I'm just going to flip back here. So these are agronomic and environmental benefits that we can quantify by improving our field efficiency. This is not even mentioning the economic benefits, which Miles will discuss a little bit later on. So for 2024, Sask FSA is going to be really focused on quantifying some of this field efficiency concept. So we're going to be dialing into some projects to quantify this field efficiency data. And these are all visuals of things that we will be looking at for 2024. We also do have a research project on the go with HARF Research, Indian Head Research Foundation. And essentially this project here, I will just quickly explain it. We are in year 3 of this project. The objective is to identify and quantify soil and crop production benefits using targeted tile drainage to manage this excess temporary water on the prairie pothole landscape. So I'm just going to show you a visual here that this tile, we call it targeted tile or network tile installation, but essentially the tile plow runs through this would probably be class 2 wetland here, a temporary water, swing through this second depression into a consolidation point at the bottom here, and a third tile installation line over on this side. So this is 2021 pre-seed. And again, looking at that field and efficiency piece of reduction of overlap, compaction, time spent and emissions, looking at soil health and just nutrient use efficiency and all of the things previously mentioned. So this was this season in crop, the canola crop. You can see that these areas are fully remediated with this tile drainage. And in this depression number 3 over here, I should have put the video in for you to see today, but Kyle Hagee is our board director. This is his research project, and he did a video of himself combining through this Depression 3 area over here, and his yield monitor bumped up to 30 bushels an acre in this area. So pretty clear benefits to soil health, nutrient use efficiency, and yields when it comes to the network tiling. So as I mentioned, we didn't even tie into the economic benefits yet. Farmers very clearly know that drainage is one of their most kind of business risk management, one of their most critical business risk management tools. And so I'm just going to pass it over to Miles here, and he's going to walk us through some of the economic pieces that he's actually quantified on his own land, on his own farm.
Great, thank you, Candace. Yeah, so I'll going to briefly run through this presentation. I probably could spend an hour or two on each one of these, so we're just going to give you the highlight of some of the information that we've come up with or have come up with on our own farm. And often the challenge when trying to explain how important water management is getting solid numbers behind it. And and economics is really what drives us, obviously. But most farmers knew that there's a large advantage to managing the water. It's just didn't know exactly what they were. I'll need you to probably advance slides for me, Candace.
Yeah,
go to the next one, please.
I just want to point out on this slide, if you look on the left, this is an unmanaged field. And if you look on the right, this is just a visualization that Mother Nature really always decides that no 2 years are ever the same. And this field on the right is actually a fully managed field, but just the way Mother Nature decided to spread her rainfall across the season, you still run into challenges even on your fully managed fields.
So this is that same field that Candace was pointing to, the yield data there. So this was a fairly managed field, but like you said, even on an excess moisture year, there's still some effects felt. But without management, this crop would have been a total write-off. But in this case, we were still able to get a decent yield off of it. We're trying to mitigate or lower the effects of that excess water, and can't totally get rid of it, but definitely want to try and reduce it as much as possible. Next slide, please. So when coming up with the numbers, we kind of have to identify how much, how many of these small areas are in these fields and what effect they each have, and then get to a cumulative effect. So this is a typical quarter in eastern Saskatchewan, a lot of potholes. And this one here, again, has seen some development. You can see some ditches there by the number 14 and number 1, and even down number 29, 30. So these areas actually are a lot more reduced than they typically would be, but they're still present in the landscape. So in a lot of fields, you're going to see these small 1/3 of an acre potholes, but they're going to be, upward 30 or more of them on a field. So 1 or 2 may not have a large effect, but you start adding them up all together, you can certainly it certainly can start to have a very, very tremendous effect on the yield. So when you add up these small little areas and 30 of them on a field, on my farm, each one of those areas actually is going to cost me $828 in lost yield and lost fertilizer. So over the course of 1 year, it's $25,000 per quarter section, and $170 an acre is lower than the guesses there, but this is the equivalent of $170 an acre on every acre of the farm, not just on the ones around the potholes. So when it comes up to $25,000 per quarter section, that's especially on a year like this, high inputs and then lower commodity prices going. A managed field versus an unmanaged field probably is the difference between making money on that quarter and losing money on that quarter, just with the circumstances that we're in right now. Next slide. So if you're a 5,000 acre farm, $170 an acre, that means the difference of $850,000 per year in revenue. And that's, again, an annual year over year over year. So that's the difference between being profitable and making it, and you know, and maybe just sustaining or even losing money if you don't have managed ground. So that's the strict money. And then it's, well, we always had the question, you know, we're on this good half section. Why can we do it faster than a poor half section and you get more acres? So not only is it going to take more time, but what does a corner actually cost you, and why, and how much? So briefly, just going to compare a good half. And I always make the joke here. I always got to point out I do have some good farmland. We like to highlight my bad fields on these presentations, but this is actually one of my fields. It's not even one of the other board directors. So this is this half section here is not too far from my house, and you can see the paths there. I got a few rocks to pick by the looks of it, but on this field here, I think it's 75 quarters. Just advance the thing.
75 corners.
75 corners on this this half section, so it's a half mile by a mile there. So then you move over, actually just a mile and a half east of there, so very similar area, not very far away. This is a half section that hasn't, to be honest, it actually has been developed quite a bit, but it still has a long way to go, as you can see. So obviously going to be a lot more corners. So click on the next one, Candice. So these arrows that are going to come up here are going to show, or sorry, this is just the number of corners. So you add up all the different corners in this this piece of field. So you got 58, 34 in that area, 27. You add all these up, it's going to be 413 times you have to turn on that field versus 75 on a half section. That half section with 75 corners has 320 acres. This half section only has 210, but you turn 413 times. So in addition to that, it's very broke up, a lot of travel time trying to get from one area to the other. You start on the right-hand side of the field, you work down, okay, you finish that area, you got to go up to the next area that's not seeded or sprayed or whatever you're doing, do that area, and so on and so forth. So you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of distance just driving around, getting from one piece of the field to the other. How much more time is that when you add it up? So it's 338 more corners on that one field versus the other. At 4 miles an hour, that's going to be another 15 seconds per turn. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you add it up, that's 85 minutes more just for turning on that field. That's just the corners. In addition to that, there's going to spend almost another hour driving around, an additional 7.6 kilometers that you're pulling this equipment around the field just to get from one area that's worked already done to the area that's not. So a combine, in that amount of time, you could do another 40 acres in lost time. And that's not counting overlap, compaction, time driving around, any throw over on the corners. Combines, you know, if they're not running full, they'll throw over, and extra fuel use, etc. We're going to get into some of that information here shortly. And this is likely understated. It's based if you only had one combine. If you're running 3 combines in that same field, chances are they're each going to spend that 57 minutes driving around, because you're all going to be working together, going from one area of the field to the other. So how much more time over a season? We're going to be pre-seed spraying, in-crop spraying, fungicide, harvest, harrowing. There's a lot of operations that go over each field every year. So when you break it out, pre-seed spraying, you're going to spend another 24 minutes turning, another 20 minutes of travel time. And then the same for in-crop spraying.
Sorry, just moving things around.
Moving slow. I'm talking too fast here. Seeding, 77 minutes turning, 63 minutes of travel time. In-crop spraying, the same as the pre-seed, 24 minutes and 20. An additional, if you're fungicide spraying, you have to go around the same amount. Go again for pre-harvest spray. A lot of straight cut canola getting pre-harvest sprayed, and the wheat, of course, will get sprayed. Do that again. And then the combining, we talked a bit about that, 85 minutes turning, 57 minutes of travel time. And if you do a post-harvest spraying, again, the 24 minutes turning, another 20 minutes of travel time. Harrowing in the fall, 49 minutes turning and 35 minutes travel. So it adds up to a lot of time. So when you add all those numbers up, you're going to spend another 307 minutes turning, 235 minutes traveling. So it's another 9 hours on your equipment in a year. I could give, if anybody's interested in more detailed numbers, I got these in another presentation. I can certainly share them with you. But the cost of ownership and depreciation on seeding is going to cost you another $830. Spraying is going to be another $1,000. Harvest another $600. Tractor and harrow another $196. So a total of $2,666 or another $13 an acre just in ownership and depreciation costs on your equipment. That's just on the additional time. I know you go to trade a piece of equipment off, it's all based on the hours. So if you're spending more time just turning and driving around, it's going to cost you more come time to update. So extra fuel that equipment is going to be using over the course of the year. This is all of them added together, another $1,330, $6.65 an acre. And on a totally managed field, you're still going to have overlap. I find I'm still about 7% on most fields that are well managed, but you're going to cut that down from 14% unmanaged on an unmanaged field. At $250 an acre just in variable inputs, that's another $17.50 an acre difference between those two fields.
So just to, how would you sum that all up, Miles?
I guess the big thing is, you know, what we're trying to demonstrate to the policymakers and to others is just give an understanding of how, you know, they're not just a nuisance, these small areas, the added costs and the added, it's not just the inconvenience, it's the financial aspect. It certainly adds up, and it you know, snowballs over and over and over. It just gets larger and larger. So when we're talking about managing these small areas, well, if there's a few of them, it's not a big deal. But when you're faced with so many, you know, that's the difference between these farms and our farms being able to grow and be profitable versus, you know, staying the same or shrinking or going backwards financially.
Absolutely. Any questions or comments on that information that Miles just presented?
Tim here. I just, you know, we talk about this at Saskavisse lots, that improved fields, huge users of field moisture themselves. And they are one of the best water management tools. And yields rise and efficiencies of fertilizers and sprays rise. And I think Miles is, you know, detail what happens to, you know, the wrecks of unimproved fields. So, but fields are big crops, they're big users of moisture.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other comments, questions?
Candace, it's Ron here. And this would maybe be directed more, say, to Brad Haberman from the crushing side of it. I think as farmers, we all know that those marginal areas, the crop is delayed. You know, it's going to be either higher moisture, the average may be dry from that field, and maybe higher in green seed as we go through it. Just wondering, Brad, is there anything you would comment, you know, about crush quality of grain that is struggling, or that you're struggling with when you get variability in seed and stuff like that from some of these marginal fields, or is there no way to quantify it on your end either?
I don't think there's a huge way to quantify it. Obviously, in past years, we've had some higher green counts come in. This year, not so much, I don't think. Yeah, obviously, with the maturity of the crop in those different areas, I think it makes a bit of a difference, you know, putting that green stuff into the bin and maybe higher moisture stuff into the bin because it's a lower area in the field. Obviously higher moisture, and then you could run into problems if you got, you know, a spot in the bin that maybe gets, you know, a little hot, and it just quantifies the whole problem. So I guess that's my take. I don't know if Steve wanted to chime in and give his 2 cents, but yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, like I think what you're looking to get at here, Ryan, is just if there's a huge difference in quality. I think there probably is a big difference, whether it's stress that much more, but it's just like it's kind of a hard thing to quantify. It just all gets lumped into a bin and all just comes in here, so it's hard for us to pick that out, right?
Yeah, really good point there, Ryan, because you know, when we're dialing into these benefits, we're talking the agronomic and the environmental and the economic, right? And those are all pieces of sustainability. And if we can improve the field efficiency, we improve all these areas. So very good point. Okay, we're going to, you guys chime in at any time as always, but so one of the critical roles of SaskFSA is to really dig into policy solutions. And so I actually got asked this question yesterday, and someone from the industry said to me, so do you help farmers get drainage approvals? And I said, well, actually, no, we don't get involved in really one-on-one approvals unless there's some issues that come to light that we can help dig into and support policy changes on the back end. So really, SaskFSA, we dig into all these areas. Any policy involved in a drainage registration is what we're doing, working hard behind the scenes. And we have a board of 12 directors that are all landowners that all dedicate an amazing amount of time to just brainstorming some solutions and talking to people and working with the regulator and the government. So a lot of details in here of just different policy items that we look at: point of adequate outlet mapping, lengths of term for approvals, security for approvals. How can we remove obstructionists in the programs, whether that's bottlenecks or just basically requests for assistance or complaints just because of personal issues, not water issues. The whole responsibility of drainage and maintaining water, looking at different pilot projects to get on the ground to look at different policy avenues and solutions. We are also considering launching a drainage extension network for Saskatchewan. I'll get into that a little more later on, but looking at efficiencies for qualified person or QP programming. And of course, the other side of that is hosting field tours, events, developing some communication materials, talking to media, just really trying to change the narrative of drainage as a critical business management tool and a soil health and field efficiency tool. So, and overall, our overall objective would be to increase the number of successful drainage applications and approvals in Saskatchewan. So digging into this Saskatchewan Drainage Extension Network, this came about as it is very clear to us that we are kind of the only association in Saskatchewan that advocates for responsible drainage and just water management in general in the prairie pothole landscape. And what we know to be true is that there aren't many, but there are some water management silos that exist all across this province, and it's time to really draw everybody together and get more unified. So this is connecting landowners, agriculture associations, industry and researchers, regulators, and government have a role to play in there, but to share and improve knowledge on progressive drainage practices in Saskatchewan to support our soil health, crop management, and healthy landscapes. So that's the overall mission of it. We're currently working on developing some terms of reference for this program and creating kind of a foundational team to get this off the ground. But essentially, when we look at it, our success would be that we create this drainage extension network in Saskatchewan, and we then collaborate with our provincial neighbors, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, kind of our more advanced water management provinces, and also our southern neighbors. And going back to that, that Saskatchewan hosts 44% of Canadian farmland, Our job is to produce food, and we don't have sufficient drainage extension resources for growers in this province. We also want to tie irrigation into this concept because irrigation and drainage ultimately go hand in hand. So when we talk about changing the narrative, we also do other work like engaging media to tell the other side of the story. We have learned to never assume that people know what you're talking about. And we also know that the media likes to grab onto sensationalism. So basically, people being flooded out, people complaining, anti-agriculture stories in a way. So we dig into some of those media resources. As I mentioned before, there's lots of different people that are interested in having a say on how farmers actually manage their land and water resources. And so there's different university projects going on. The Bridging the Water Adaptation Gap is actually being facilitated by Margot Hurlbert at the University of Regina. So we're involved in these conversations. And there's a regional assessment for the Coupelle River watershed is in progress. And so they're looking at environmental water, basically, and cultural flows. So they're not looking at agriculture. And because of us, they are actually factoring in agriculture more prominently into this conversation. So when I mentioned field tours and field days, our mandate is to get on the ground, get people out to the field to show them what happens at the field level. And this is exactly what our Friends of Farm Stewardship funds are used for, this public education piece, talking about different water innovations. So really important to us is some strategic partnerships as we continue to try to advance innovations in responsible drainage in this province. So tying in people that are agriculture innovators and influencers into conversations. And just a really quick example of that is Saskatchewan's currently in the position where they're trying to develop an agriculture water management strategy, in particular, a wetland retention policy. And so again, this is exactly what SaskFSA is focused on. So we pulled together a very successful meeting this November, inviting 15 different landowners from across this province, representing different soil zones, different watershed basins, and different associations across the province. And so as far as the participants go, we nailed it. Had water security executive team there, the Ministry of Agriculture, Saskanola, Sask wheat growers, outstanding young farmers, APAS, SCDA, SARM, kind of all the key groups in Saskatchewan that should be involved in agriculture water management, and providing some feedback on the policy as it was designed by water security and providing some different solutions. So again, really important function of what we do, holding some policy focus groups. We are involved in the APAS Land and Environment Committee, and we're the lead amplifier group when it comes to water management, working with some strategic partners like APAS. So again, just a shout out to our current Friends of Farm Stewardship. These resources are quite invaluable to us, so thank you so much for your support and just getting involved in some of our days. So when it comes to collaboration, what does that look like to you? And so importantly, we do use those sponsorship funds for outreach events. We are open to any kind of collaboration, and I guess it's part of how we can open up this conversation. What does that look like? In-kind service or technology contributions, having us come speak at a meeting that you're involved in. If you're at a trade show, we could pop in and do a little pop-up for a day, be your guest at your booth for a day, all kind of different ideas, using your networks to spread some of the messaging. And of course, looking at some co-branding opportunities would be another idea. essentially, when we talk about best when managed, we're looking at, taking a field that looks like this, managing this temporary and seasonal water to grow food in this agriculture zone. And really, this is what we're talking about. So taking that previous landscape and improving field efficiency. So you're looking at a field landscape like this.